When you said humorous or embarrassing,
Yes,
you opened
right.
the door a little bit wider there. Let me tell you one fairly embarrassing situation one time, and then come back to a more humorous.
All right, this is Roy Deaver. You all know Roy. All right. Now, I'll tell you what, I felt like that, really, the appreciation of mine toward Brown Trail and its stand for the truth and its conviction and orthodoxy and integrity was a little bit shaken the other night when Roy Deaver spoke without a blackboard. Roy?
Can I use that mic?
You sure can. Yeah.
Attaboard, I'd use it. I really did. Over here near Weatherford, and because I wanted to, with regard to the person for whom the funeral was being conducted, I wanted to somehow impress the word rugged. I just write it on the board, by the board. Pioneer family, great Christian family.
Brother Roy, before you get started,
I'm already started.
I want to hear more about this saddle that you bought.
Bob, you've been talking, boy.
The saddle to keep it from getting wet.
Woo! That came from Robert Bankers. Robert lived for a long time down in Longview. Longview's where I grew up. Of course, I grew up a long time before Robert got there. Robert and I met at Freed Hardeman College, 1940. I got there in 40, and you came 41 or 2.
Right, 41.
But this was an interesting thing to me. It was awfully frustrating. Somehow my dad had worked late that night at East Texas Oil Refinery there, and that often happened. And it's Wednesday night. Well, I decided I'll ride my horse into services. We lived 7 miles out in the country. And I had a brand new saddle. I just ordered it from Montgomery Ward, right down here on 7th Street, price $29.95. I was paying it out $4 a month. I was building fires at the little 3-teacher school there every morning starting at 4 o'clock. But I made $4 a month. I said, man, I can pay for that saddle. I rode my horse in that new saddle, tied him to a telephone pole over by the high school there, right near the old Second Whaley congregation. And during the service, I heard the rain falling. There's my horse out there with the new saddle on, and the rain is falling. Well, I said, I've got to go. I went out and got in that saddle. Well, there's no need just sit there. I may as well go on home. I got in the saddle to keep it from getting wet and took it home. That's what Robert's talking about. I was preaching years ago in a meeting in Denver City, Texas. I was preaching on personal work that night, and I kept on emphasizing, more than I'd planned to, how to proceed in doing this work. I even went so far as to invite the audience to go with me back here to Genesis 3. Let's just talk about how the devil himself proceeded in converting Eve from truth to error. And I discussed various steps that were taken there. And the longer I talked about that, Brother Taylor, the more excited I got about it. And finally I said, in fact, brethren, if you want to know how to do personal work, go to the devil. Woo! That didn't come out just right either, Robert, but they'll never forget it, and I won't either. But one of the most humorous things to me that has happened in recent years was during the Warren-Madsen debate. This was about the third night, and we were discussing, by we I mean Tom Warren, Bob Camp, and myself in particular, were discussing the affirmative material. We were going to stress that God has a law that is higher than human law, higher than international law, which even atheists recognize, and we had Dr. Flu's own handwriting on that particular point. Yes, the Nazis were wrong. They were morally wrong when they murdered 6 million Jews. Well, according to what law, what standard? So Brother Warren was doing a lot of studying on what's going on right at that time in Vietnam, and it was a terrible, horrible thing that was going on as recorded by and reported by Time Magazine, Newsweek, and others. So Brother Warren was thinking about Vietnam. We've gone down to the lobby for breakfast that morning. Brother Tom was sitting with his back to the wall. Bob Camp was on the end of the table, and I'm sitting up with my back to most of the people. When Brother Warren, as you likely well know, gets started on a line of thought, there's nothing in the world that can distract him or get him off of that line of thought. Doesn't matter what else is going on or how hard you try to talk to him. He's still, he holds on like a bulldog. But I heard someone coming from behind, looked up about the time this waitress got right even with me. She leaned over to whisper to me. She said, I've had so many complaints about the coffee. She said, is it really that bad? Brother Warren said, it is so bad that Senator McGovern is advocating mounting a military invasion. She started to walk off. I said, ma'am, he's talking about Vietnam, not your coffee.
Okay, who's next? Who's next? Come on, Wyatt. Oh, he's got his wife with him. That's the embarrassing part. No, I'm kidding, Chris. Okay, Brother McClung. Brother McClung.
Well, I can't get out, so can you hear me?
I think so.
Two things, as quick as I can tell them. My introduction to the ministry, I'd like to tell you about. When I first started, 57 years ago, since I wasn't here yesterday, I believe that exceeds the record set yesterday. 50.
Except where you stood where Moses did.
But anyway, briefly, Alfred Wells, who's been the song director for the college church, University Church in Abilene for many years, and most of you know him, and he's a native of Fort Worth, of course. He was a singer and I was a preacher in this first meeting after I started preaching down close to Old Mexico. Catula, a lot of you know where Catula is. But we've been promised that it'd be well advertised and they'd have us a nice place for the services and everything. We got down there and nothing had been done. We thought it was a town of 10 or 20,000 because it had two trunk line railroads through it. We got down there, that burned down years before that. And they hadn't rebuilt it because it wasn't worth it, they didn't think. And there was only one store and service station together. Alfred and I got busy, and, well, we would have come home, but we didn't have the money. We just had enough money to get down there. My dad gave us money to buy gasoline and something to eat, and his dad furnished the Model T Ford. And Alfred turned around and started back to Fort Worth, and I said, Alfred, where are you going? He said, home, of course. We can't have a meeting down here. And I said, you forget we don't have enough money to buy one more meal. And so he stopped. Well, we went back. There were just two members, and they were women. And one of the sisters' husbands had been for many years making their living by making and selling bootleg liquor. So we really, bootleg liquor, so we really had a fine introduction. We got in that old car, went around through the mesquites and the briars and prickly pears and so on, and found every house we could that got their mail at that little post office and service station and store, and got them together. And finally, we found out the meeting hadn't been advertised, so we bought some Crayolas and some tablets and made our own signs and put them up everywhere, advertising the meeting. And then we went over to, there was only one nice building in town, that was the high school. And the Baptist church was using that high school as the Baptist church building. And the trustees were leaders in the Baptist church. The preacher was one of them. And they suggested we meet him because he had control of the lights. And we went to see him, and he said, yes. He said, I'll be happy to provide the lights at no cost to you, and you're welcome to use the auditorium, the high school auditorium, which is the church auditorium. He was a full-time Baptist preacher there, had a large congregation. And he said, my family and I'll be there right up on the front every night. And I couldn't understand that. But anyway, it didn't take us long to find out. And he suggested, now, if you want us to attend your services, you come and attend ours on Sunday morning, and we let you have Sunday night and Sunday afternoon. So we did. Walked in, and he asked me to come down to his class, visit in it, the adult class, and asked Brother Wells. He came to me and he said, Fred, what in the world will they do? They just handed me a quarterly and want me to teach this Baptist quarterly. What will I do? I handed my testament and I said, go and teach the 8th chapter of Acts to them. And I wondered why this Baptist preacher was so, you see, I didn't have as much experience as Brother Bankus and the rest of it. I couldn't understand why he was so interested. And sure enough, they came Friday night and Saturday night, right up the front. He and his wife and 2 grown children. And on Sunday morning, he insisted I must come to his class. Now, a lot of you brethren don't believe in debate, but my introduction into the ministry taught me it pays to have them when you can. Anytime you can get a group of people in here willing for you to come and present the truth and lay it side by side with error, I'll guarantee you it pays. And I've got one example after the other where it did pay in my ministry. But he started teaching that class, and then he immediately switched to the Church of Christ and started abusing us and telling things on us that wasn't so. I kept trying to get permission to speak, and he wouldn't let me have it until he got through with what he was saying. And then finally he let me stand up where I was. Now, let me just tell you, we didn't have time to get any help and organize an official debate. But if there ever was a debate, that Baptist preacher and I had it right there. And it covered every subject, all the differences in the Baptist church and their doctrine and the truth. And they had a special preacher coming in for their preaching services, and they never finished their Bible school. They never had that preaching service. They didn't get to eat any lunch. Nobody went home for lunch. Our debate lasted until 3 o'clock that afternoon. And I baptized every Sunday school teacher they had. I baptized the treasurer. I baptized the deacons. I baptized the song leader. I baptized, by the help of God, so many members of that church, it took them 3.5 years to get enough Baptists together to meet again. I could tell you in connection with it how a gang led by a woman from old Mexico came over and scared us half to death one night. And 2 of them were standing with their knives open in the door during that same meeting. But that's one thing that got us a little advertising, and everybody came back to see what was going to happen next. But I wouldn't recommend that to increase your attendance. Now, may I tell you, twice, upon another occasion down in East Texas, I can't take time to tell the details. I was invited to come over and speak to the Baptist group. The preacher invited me to come and talk to his group, and I preached one sermon. And I found out they'd been coming and staying outside the building and listening to me preach for several nights. That when we extended the invitation, the Baptist preacher was the first to come. And then with a little talk made by him, and both of us together, we baptized every member of that Baptist church. And I baptized him first, and then I made another little talk. I said, now you baptized all these folk wrong. Instead of me baptizing the rest of them, all these men and women and their children and so on, why don't you do it right? You did it wrong. Why don't you do it right? Would you like to have him do it right since he baptized you wrong? And they all said yes. And so he baptized them. May I just tell you this, that one time I was preaching to Sherrod Avenue Church in Florence, Alabama, and I came to the old Glenwood Church of Christ. Anybody here admit they're old enough to know about the Glenwood Church? All right. And, of course, I had mud on the car. My brother was in the car with me. We'd been out to my dad's and came in the day before the meeting started to buy some supplies. And I just left the courthouse. Now, a lot of people can't understand how God can do what Paul said he could do. It's God that works in you to make you want to do and to do his good will, you see. And I tell people, why, I can do that. And other people, men can do it, so you know God can do it. And if you're still in doubt, let me just briefly touch the high points here. Now, mind you, I never thought about pulling over to the curb on that viaduct, going across on North Main from the courthouse, across Trinity River. I was perfectly satisfied to go right on down the street. I never thought about stopping or heading it into the curb. But all of a sudden, two fellows worked on me and in me the strongest desire I ever had in my life to stop and to head her into the curb. I looked over. My brother said, "You've got company." And there was two guns sticking out of the police car. And they pulled right up beside me and nearly hit us. And they said, "Stop her, big boy, and head her into the curb." Well, I'll have to tell you, all of a sudden, I hadn't wanted to stop. But they worked on me and in me, strongest desire I ever had to stop and to head her into the curb. And I did. And one of them came around, covered my brother, and I said, "You made a mistake somewhere." They said, "You're the one that's made the mistake." And I said, they said, "Get out of that car." And they said, "You killed your last person." I said, they had me sticking my hands up, and I just played out, holding them up so long. And I said, "I've got some things in my pocket." They said, "Yes, we know." Said, "We'll go into your pockets." And I said, "Well, I've got some things under the front seat." They said, "Yes, machine gun." And that will prove that you're wrong and I'm right. But briefly, they arrested me for John Dillinger. My hair was black then. And took me out of the car and across the bridge and headed me for the federal prison. Because they thought I was John Dillinger, and I just killed a man not far out. And finally, I kept talking. You know, it pays to talk. I kept talking, and finally, I just said everything I could think of, and a lot of things I never had thought of. And I told about this gospel meeting of the Glenwood Church of Christ, and that I actually lived in Florence, Alabama. They said, "A preacher, huh?" I said, "That's new. You've never been a preacher before." And I said, "I start tomorrow night. I'd like to invite all of you officers to come to the meeting, the Church of Christ, Glenwood Church of Christ, tomorrow night." And you know, one of the officers was a member of the Glenwood Church of Christ. And just before they locked me up in the federal prison as John Dillinger, he said, "Fellas, he's talked so much. As far as I'm concerned, he's talked himself out of it. He's not John Dillinger." And they went back and examined everything up. But anyway.
I'll tell you, I believe he was talking too, don't you? Right. David, anything? You must have had some fun experiences either here or Australia.
I'm trying to wait till everybody finishes eating here.
Oh, everybody's finished. If they're not, they should be.
I suppose every preacher has some interesting experiences in eating with people. And those that are a little bit older even have some more exciting experiences than some of the rest of us. This is a story of an experience in Australia. At that particular time, a friend of mine, this fellow's name was Dennis Simmons. He was the original Dennis the Menace in Australia. He and I were heading to another state in Australia for the purpose of trying to help a couple of churches. Each one of them had some special problems, and I was going to deliver some special lectures. I actually thought that delivering a few sermons was going to solve all the problems. But this particular place where we went, Dennis and I were invited to stay in this home. And this particular home was within itself a story. It's a national monument. It's preserved by the area there. And the person that lives there, who was our host, is a national monument. And a member of the church in this particular city. And it's getting a little bit more eccentric as the days go by. I visited his home before, but it even moved a little bit farther since the previous time I was there. Downstairs, they kept a few boarders, and that's where we had our rooms. They lived upstairs. This man had married recently, and he lived upstairs. Now, he receives, and did at that time, I suppose still does, a little bit of support from the U.S. For his work. Since his home is tied in with the government, he gets a little bit of income from that. And he keeps a few chooks out in the yard and among the weeds. That's chickens. And I wondered really how the man lived, and I found out. As you went up the stairs into their quarters, they had a cabinet over here with just wire on it, string wire. And it had a very strong odor. And I asked what that was. Well, that was their meat locker. And I'll tell you about the meat later. But anyway, it's not refrigerated. It's just there. That's the meat locker. You go on up the stairs where they live, and he took me into a room which, within itself, this room is an extremely unusual room. I will not describe the room, but in the middle of the floor is a pile of rotting vegetables about this high. What he did, he would go down and help the people unload at the grocery store when different trucks would come in. He'd help them unload, and they would give him the pick of the vegetables that they were throwing away. And he had this great big pile of all these rotting vegetables. We went into the place where we were to eat, and the table, and you just barely get into the table there. Oh, Johnny, I'm talking about it. I better be careful. Into the place where you eat there, and you can barely get in because the walls are packed up with newspapers and magazines. You ever known people that could not throw anything away? You just barely squeeze in. The table is up against the window, and the flies, of course, everywhere, but he was concerned about those. Generally, while we were eating, he would get his spray, and he would spray. Directly above the table is the bird cage. Against the window. We always try to eat as far as we go down. Okay, we were going to have our meals, and this is where we're going to have all of our meals while we were there for several days. While I was trying to take care of that particular congregation.
You cut that meeting short.
We really did. So we were there, and we had our first meal, and I was doing the very best I could. And we got to the end of this particular meal, and they had a little bowl thing that looked like congealed gravy. Brown, congealed, cold gravy. Turned out, though, this was banana pudding. No, not banana pudding. It was stewed bananas. And really what it was stewed rotten bananas. That's what it was. And I put a tiny little spoonful on my plate. And anyway, the man was so proud of his wife, who used to be a cook, and telling us how to used to be a professional cook. So proud of how she could take these overripe bananas and and cook them this special way, and make this great delicacy. Well, anyway, here's Dennis is now coming into this story. Dennis, as we're sitting there trying to put something down to try to be good guests, Dennis is asking for the recipe. He wrote this thing down. Okay, so we got through that all right, and I got past the meat kettle downstairs. We went to the service, and I'm not feeling too good after the service is over for various reasons. It's a real hard situation. I presented a very controversial lesson. Then you have a question and answer session, and shoot me down. So I came home, and I just couldn't. In Australia, you have tea, that's your evening meal, and supper is your late night snack. You always have to have supper. It's a cup of tea and some biscuits or cookies and so on. And I just couldn't go back up those steps past that meat kettle. And I just know, and into the bird feathers. I just couldn't do it. And I told Dennis, I said, listen, I'm going to bed. And you just beg out, because I'm going to bed. I just can't take this. My stomach's all torn up. I'm going to bed. Well, I'm in bed. I'm just starting to settle down. There's a knock at the door. Anyway, Dennis had told them this terrible story about how exhausted I was and how nice it would be if they brought me my they brought me my cup of tea and so on. So, anyway, the next day, we're up there for evening meal. We're kind of trying to make it through. And so the next day, we're up there, and we found out what was in the meat cabinet. And we got this pan of grease, which is, what this was scraps of pork, and still had the skin on it, still had the bristles. And they cooked it down to where it was just this thing kind of floating in the grease. And so we're there, and I get a little bit, and I'm trying to be such a good guest, I'm trying to be properly appreciative and so on. And Dennis is saying things like, we've got ourselves into a hairy situation. I'm trying not to laugh, but I want to be a good guest. I want to be properly appreciative. So we finally get through that. We go downstairs, and Dennis goes over to the mirror and he goes, checks his tongue out, and then he gets his razor and starts shaving his tongue. He pulls bristles out. Anyway, I couldn't take any more of it. I was supposed to speak that evening. It was Sunday evening. It was Sunday. This final kind of straw that broke the camel's back. We checked out at the airport. We found out that we could leave within the hour and fly, back in the direction we were headed. So we told them, said, look, we've got a real good connection here. If we wait till tomorrow, we've got bad connections. And so we flew out that afternoon.
Johnny Ramsey.
I think I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Eddie Whitney and Robert Banker. I might not know it, but Robert preached in my hometown when I was just born. He was already a very old man. It's always one of the first places he preached. He grew up in Ohio, and he wanted to be a preacher, and he was a good boy, but he stuttered. And so his folk wanted to send him to Detroit to get a doctor to help him. So they put him on a bus in Dayton, heading for Detroit. The fellow came in and sat down by him. The fellow turned to him and said, where are you going? Robert said, I'm going to Detroit. What are you going to do Detroit? He said, I'm going to Detroit to see Dr. McPherson so he can cure my stutter. And the fellow said, he's a good doctor. I ain't one to cure me. Made a real good impression on him now that his sermon. He did some substitute teaching in the high school, and he was in general science. Some of you remember that was the course you all had to take as freshmen. He was teaching general science one day, and he decided he would mix religion with science and teach a little Bible and some good principles of living. And so he stood before them with 2 vats and 2 worms. He took one worm and dropped it in a vat of water, and it just swam around. He took another worm and dropped it in a vat of whiskey, and it just shriveled up and died. He said, now, boys and girls, what do we learn from that? One fellow said, always drink whiskey, and you'll never have worms. I'm not surprised that Eddie Whitney's teaching. He's always loved teaching. He's loved his teachers since he's a little bit boy. When he was in the 6th grade, he really was in love with his teacher, and she loved him too. And they would have gotten married except for the age difference. She was 21 and he was 34. When Eddie was in the 7th grade, he became quite a poet. And when they graduated from grade school back in those days in the 7th grade, they asked him as poet laureate to read his greatest poem. And he stood before that audience and gave this great oration. 30 days, hacienda. April, June, and sombrero. All the rest have 31 except my uncle, and they gave that old boy 90 days. Then he went on to high school and still good a poet, and they asked him to give the poetic oration when he graduated from high school, and he had improved a lot. And this time he said, and it was so deep, they're still talking about this. They haven't quite figured out the full import of it. 30 days has September, April, June, and no wonder. All the rest eat peanut butter except Grandma and my friend, she rides a bicycle. Now this real deal just read. And always humor is better when you know the background and understand who's involved in it. A young preacher in Chino, California, I know, Stephen Lloyd, is one of the most sincere, meek, gentle, shy people I've ever met to be a preacher. He really is a great preacher. But he's the kind that puts his feet in his mouth when he tries to deviate in it from what he's really planning on saying. And when we were there in a meeting a couple of years ago, he was going to announce the first Sunday of the meeting, all activities of the week, try to get everybody ready. And he said, and on top of everything else, Friday we're going to have visitors from a lot of places. And at noon, we're going to have a pot gut lunch.
Well, do we have just one more? Just one more.
Brother Bankus, I think there's probably a lot of people here that don't know that Brown Trail almost lost an elder here a few days ago.
Is that right?
And also, Brown Trail School of Preaching almost came up without a director of the school.
I'll say.
So I think Brother Eddie Whitten could tell us a little more.
Is that right, Eddie? I hadn't heard that. We had at the Optimist Club this morning one of the writers, OK Carter, that writes for the Star Telegram. You tell me and I'll make a report to him.
There are times in people's lives when you get so scared. I mean, just terrified. I had that experience just a couple of weeks ago. All of our kids were home for the holidays, and after the Sunday morning services on the 26th of December, our oldest daughter, Sherry, who's with us here now, and her family had to go back down to Baytown, and so we went after the morning services over to First to eat. And all of our kids were here, Patty from Alaska and everywhere. And so we had completed our meal, and we were just enjoying a fellowship, and we were sitting around the table there. And being from A&M, I had told some Aggie jokes. We were just cutting up and laughing and having fun. We started to get up to leave, and there was a fellow sitting at the next table over there, 6 or 8 feet away. And he came over to me, and he said, "Sir, I want you to know I didn't like those Aggie jokes." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry. I was talking with my family here. I'm sorry that you overheard." And he said, "Well, I did overhear." And he says, "I graduated from A&M, and my son is in A&M now." And he said, "I'm full up right to here with Aggie jokes." And I said, "Well, what could I say?" I said, "I'm very sorry to have offended you, but so I turned around and walked away. A strong a preacher with a good, strong backbone doesn't mean it not necessarily that it's not yellow. But nevertheless, I turned around and walked away from that incident because I didn't want that to develop anymore. We paid our bill and walked out across the parking lot toward the car. And I turned around to see something about one of the grandkids, and I noticed this fellow was coming behind me. And he pulled a razor on me. And I don't know what he would have done if he could have found a place to plug it in.
I bid on that this morning, I'll tell you. Okay, Dick.
Let me be honest, yeah. Try to remember. Mike was a Greek, member of the Greek Orthodox Church before he was converted. And in his own country, he and a friend decided to go to France, go to Paris, and they did. They thought they'd attend the Catholic Church when they got there, and so they did that too. They weren't too familiar with the rituals and all, so they discussed it before they went in. What would they do when they got there? And they decided that they would watch the person next to them. Whatever he did, if he stood up, they'd stand up, sit down, kneel, and all that. So they sat down, and the fellow next to them, after the priest had said some things in French, they understood not a word, and stood up. So both Mike and his friend stood up. People looked around and started grinning a little bit, A little later, the man sat down, and they sat down too. After the whole thing was over, the priest came to them, and he said in Greek, "You men don't speak French, do you?" They said, "No." He said, "I thought as much. You see, we were having a christening today, and we'd asked the father of the child."
All right. In about 14 minutes, we have our next session, and Frank Dunn is here from San Antonio, he and his wife, and will be speaking at that time. And Christ's attitude, or Jesus' attitude toward the law. Been a wonderful time. I don't know whether we can stand or not, but boy, whether we can stand or not, blessed be the tie. Tom Gardner, is he here? Did he leave? Tom, would you lead us in our closing prayer? Let's sing this song together. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love, the fellowship of kindred minds is like to that love.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful unto Thee. Many blessings that we enjoy as children of thine. Father, we're so grateful for this lectureship, for all the lessons that we get to hear and to study. We ask Thee now to go with us. Help us to use our time and efforts in a way that will be pleasing unto Thee. We ask in Christ's name.
Amen.